This map highlights the modern borders of Iran, a vital geographic bridge between the Middle East and Asia. In 1908, beneath these southwestern deserts, in what was then known as Persia, prospectors struck the world's largest oil reserve at the time, instantly anchoring the region's future to the global demand for energy. For the next half-century, British interests controlled this vast underground wealth. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which would later become British Petroleum, extracted the resource to power its navy and economy. As this chart shows, the Iranian government received only 16% of the profits from its own natural resource. In 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh moved to take back control. With the backing of the Iranian parliament, he fully nationalized the country's oil industry, intending to use the sudden influx of domestic revenue to combat poverty and disease among his people. The British government retaliated swiftly to the loss of their economic asset. They evacuated their personnel from massive industrial centers like the Abadan refinery, placed a strict global embargo on Iranian oil, and petitioned the United States to assist in overthrowing Mossadegh. Unable to sell its primary export on the world market, Iran's economy buckled under the pressure. A dispute over corporate revenue and national resources had rapidly escalated into a desperate international crisis, setting the stage for foreign intervention. While the Truman administration initially rejected British requests to orchestrate a coup, President Dwight Eisenhower changed course when he took office in 1953. The British successfully persuaded him by warning that Mossadegh's government might form alliances with the Soviet Union. The result was Operation Ajax. The newly formed CIA, working directly alongside British MI6, orchestrated a deliberate, covert campaign to destabilize and topple Iran's democratically elected prime minister. After a brief standoff, Mossadegh surrendered to military forces. The intelligence agencies successfully removed him from power and restored the autocrat, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, to absolute pro-Western rule. Pro-monarchy demonstrators and paid mobs flooded the streets of Tehran. They clashed with Mossadegh's remaining guards, set newspaper offices on fire, and celebrated the return of the monarchy. The intervention secured Western access to Iranian oil and installed a reliable regional ally for Washington. However, it dismantled Iran's constitutional government, planting a deep resentment of American interference that would quietly grow for decades. Over the following years, the U.S. provided the Shah with increasing financial and military support. In 1957, the CIA helped establish SAVAK, the Shah's secret police force, explicitly training its agents in interrogation tactics to monitor and suppress political opposition. Washington viewed this control as a success. In late 1977, President Jimmy Carter praised Iran as an island of stability in the Middle East, misreading the severe domestic anger boiling in the streets against the Shah's oppression and U.S. influence. A year later, that anger erupted into the 1979 revolution. A massive coalition of leftists, nationalists, and religious factions marched through Tehran, protesting for months until the U.S.-backed Shah fled the country. Religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini returned from a 15-year exile to fill the power vacuum. He quickly marginalized his secular allies, establishing an Islamic republic governed by conservative social values and a fiercely anti-American ideology. 26 years after the U.S. deposed Iran's prime minister, the resulting autocracy collapsed. Iran flipped from America's closest Middle Eastern ally to its most bitter, ideologically driven adversary. The hostility peaked in November 1979, when a group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. embassy in Tehran. Calling the compound a den of espionage, they took more than 50 Americans hostage, holding them for over a year. The United States severed diplomatic ties and threw its support behind Iraq after it invaded Iran. This fueled a brutal 8-year conflict involving chemical weapons that left nearly 1 million people dead. While the administration of President Ronald Reagan officially designated Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism, it was later caught secretly selling weapons to Tehran to illegally fund Contra rebels in Nicaragua. Toward the end of the war in 1988, a U.S. naval ship mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655 over the Persian Gulf, killing all 298 civilians on board. Washington maintained it was an accident, but for the Iranian public, it cemented a belief in American hostility. Outgunned conventionally and isolated globally, The Iranian regime realized it could not survive a direct military conflict with the United States. Tehran shifted its entire strategy toward funding and directing regional proxy militias across the Middle East. By the 21st century, international attention shifted to fears over Iran's developing nuclear program. The global community imposed harsh sanctions that crippled Tehran's economy. In 2013, Iranian voters elected moderate President Hassan Rouhani. Promising to revive the country's devastated economy, Rouhani needed those sanctions lifted, prompting him to resume direct negotiations with world powers. These talks culminated in the 2015 Iran nuclear deal under President Barack Obama. The agreement lifted the economic embargo in exchange for strict international restrictions and oversight on Iran's nuclear capabilities. For a brief period, decades of escalating tension paused. The agreement demonstrated that despite a deep history of mistrust, diplomatic compromise between the two nations was possible. That pause ended in 2018, when President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the United States from the nuclear agreement. His administration instituted a maximum pressure campaign, aiming to drain Iran's economy completely. Tehran responded with what it called a maximum resistance campaign. Iran unleashed its network of regional proxies, ramping up attacks to harass U.S. forces and allied interests across the Middle East. The renewed hostilities peaked in January 2020, when a U.S. drone strike assassinated Qasem Soleimani, Iran's most prominent military commander, pushing the two nations back to the brink of open war. The U.S. intervention in 1953 prioritized immediate geopolitical control over democratic development. That single decision fractured trust so completely that more than 70 years later, both countries remain locked in a continuous cycle of retaliation.